Okay, yeah. Hikaru said to like wait 1 or 2 more minutes. Just yeah. So my name is Lin0xx, and I'm a part of the Noxus Files Research Center. And this talk is about subverting Windows-based firewalls. Okay, so to start off, we need a little background on what goals are and what the whole landscape of this attack is going to take place in. The prevailing mentality is that since applications are not secure, we kind of have to cover for someone else's vulnerability. You know, there's a hole here, so we have to basically cover up for what they screwed up on. So many people, in corporate security or users in general believe that a firewall is just a magic solution to this. Now, this firewall can take place in the form of either a host-based intrusion prevention system or a network-based intrusion detection system, prevention system, whatever you have. But there is one small problem with this little mentality that we have here. If you're able to exploit a vulnerable system, no matter what, you're going to have execution control. And you can still do what the user can, even though there may be attempts to stop the attacker in this case. Many of them, as you can be subverted and exploited. Former research in this area of getting past host-based intrusion prevention systems comes in FRAC 62 and Article 13 of it. It presents some more or less standard ways of bypassing many personal firewalls at the time, and some of them now. What it mainly involved, however, was just abusing trust put in a certain process. Like, for example, say you trust IE to connect out to the internet. Well, hopefully you don't, but Firefox would be a much better alternative, or Opera or something than that. But pretty much you're putting trust in this one process. Say your web browser. Now, what the goal is just to inject code into that process that's going to do the attacker's bidding. And that code will be trusted, to connect out to the internet or, spawn a reverse shell to the attacker, do whatever he wants. Now, the one problem with this is that most of these code injection techniques that abuse trust relationships between the different processes on the system are caught now. Firewalls have evolved, and so do the methods of attacking them. Now, why is more research needed in this area? These HIP systems are getting more and more common, and soon these firewalls, your antivirus systems, spyware, and all these other products will pretty much be only one. It's not going to be just a suite; it'll be just one HIP system. And not to mention, you have a big rise in file format bugs. Now, why is this an issue with us? Well, for example, say you were able to get a user to click on some, PowerPoint or Word document that has some malicious code in it that, gets ran when everything is executed. Now, any sane user would kind of think it's odd when there's a connection, say someone's trying to do a bind shell, the firewall pops them an alert, says, yeah, there's a bind going on port 31337. I don't know, that would look a little suspicious to me. And these file format bugs can be propagated a lot easier because the cross-site scripting attacks have become more and more common. And for any of you familiar with those, basically it involves abusing a trust relationship between a certain site and a user and getting them to execute possibly malicious JavaScript. So that's one method that we can use for forcing these file format bugs to be ran by the user. So just an overview of some of the tools that are needed for this. You're pretty much going to need a debugger and maybe a disassembler. Well, like what I mentioned, DBG, that pretty much acts as a disassembler too. But in case you really liked the feel of IDA or the different databasing features that it has, you could use that. And an assembler, because we're going to be writing payloads in this case, and some of them have to be written in, well, one of them has to be written in pure assembly language. So you're going to need that. And just a compiler, because there, of course, will be usage of different C programming language in this. So Microsoft Visual Studio C++ 2005, the Express Edition, it's free. You can get it. Worked very well for this. So the first firewall that we're going to go after is the firewall implemented by Microsoft in Service Pack 2. So before, you had a firewall on your Windows XP box. I believe it came by default. That was one of the features they were kind of pushing with it. It's like, wow, we have a new firewall here. But it wasn't very good. And Service Pack 2 kind of made it a little bit more of an attempt to, amp up the level of control you had with the firewall, stuff like that. And so it's pretty tightly integrated into Windows. Like I said, it does offer a bit more control, but there's one really big problem. Now what I'm going to do is I have a local MSDN library right here, and I'm going to search for a certain string called exercising the Windows firewall. Let's see what happens when I do that. Okay, so it's going to search there. And okay, exercising the Windows firewall. What do we have here? Okay, so what we basically have is code to do stuff like, okay, let's just read the functions off here, see if we find anything interesting. Firewall initialize, firewall is on, firewall cleanup. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. Windows firewall turn on. Oh, Windows firewall turn off. Oh, that sounds interesting for our purposes. So as you can see here, they pretty much inside MSDN give you all the code that you need to use to turn off the firewall programmatically. This is obviously a very big problem. Oh yeah, but just some other methods that you can that are really interesting on this is, okay, just to read off some of these, add, allowing connections out of that. That's what happens when you play these little online games or whatever. They automatically configure your firewall. Yeah, they're poking a hole through it. So it'll do stuff like allow ICMP. Let's see here. Yeah, well, those are the main things. I mean, you can pretty much poke a hole through it and disable it as well. So this isn't 0-day, of course. It's a feature. So basically how this all works is there is a COM interface exported. And like I'd kind of demonstrated what those different methods can do. So basically, here's the kind of outline that we're going to use for the shell code that we need to write for this this firewall. So we do a get local policy. From this, we can use a method called get current profile, and from that profile, there's a method called put firewall enabled. Variant false sounds like a very good option in this case, doesn't it? Yeah. As you can see right here, I have pretty much, this is the Linux version of the firewall payload. I have one working as a payload that actually gets executed by Metasploit, and that's much more useful than this, because this right here is not very robust, the assembly for it, because if you can see up here, I used hard-coded function addresses, and the one that I had written for Metasploit does not use hard-coded function addresses. It manually resolves all the functions that we have to use, such as, well, mainly in this case, get proc address and load library. So just to give you a little overview of that, it does some initializes the COM object, and does the get local policy, get current profile, and then put firewall enabled. So now to demonstrate this, I have a little demo for you all, because nothing would be complete if we did not have demos. So this right here. This is a little flash movie because I learned the hard way to not have multiple virtual machines running on the same system. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to enable the firewall just to show that this is in fact working. So what I'm going to do now is run Metasploit, and then I'm going to use the WMF vulnerability to exploit this system. So I'm going to set my payload right here to the WinXP XPFW bind. And it's going to do a bind because pretty much that's what the Windows ICF catches. It is mainly binds, not connectbacks. There's a reason for this, though, that this payload is actually still useful. But what I'm going to do now is browse to this malicious web server that Metasploit has set up. And as you can see right there, the firewall just got disabled. And then for various issues with Metasploit that I have, we're going to netcat to the port that I told it to bind to. And now we have a shell. So as you can see right here, that's just typing echo iwin in there, just for added effect. Okay. Now some of you may ask, if you can get out of there just by doing a connect back, what is the point of this payload? Well, the point is if this is turned on, you're not going to really be able to browse the various shares of the network. And if you want to get out and steal other files from shares or whatever on whatever network you are on, you're pretty much going to need to disable this somehow. And so this is what will provide a method to do that. So now we've taken care of the Windows XP firewall. Let's move on to something a lot more complicated. The next firewall that we are going to attack is the ZoneAlarm personal firewall. As you can see, this is not exactly the latest version of it, but at the time of writing this presentation it was. But a little bit of background on this. ZoneAlarm is one of the main personal firewalls used. Most computer users, well, a large amount of them, know what ZoneAlarm is or use it, at least from ones I've experienced. Now, the personal firewall, or the host-based intrusion prevention system in this case, has a very, very hard job to do. You have to think about it here, because it has to defend from threats locally and remotely. It has to prevent you from getting a shell on the person's or your meterpreter payload shoveled in. And it also has to prevent viruses or other forms of malware from manually disabling the firewall. Now, the way it does this is through this little mechanism called TrueVector. Pretty much, this is a driver that keeps ZoneAlarm safe from remote and local threats. So it's pretty much the core of ZoneAlarm. What ZoneAlarm basically is it's a GUI that kind of rides on top of this TrueVector. So you have the user layer, that's ZoneAlarm, and then you got the kernel layer, and that's TrueVector. And it's very aggressive about defending itself. So just a little outline here of what we plan to do. If we can get write access to the ZoneAlarm process and are able to inject code into it, that will actually disable the firewall, and we can run this code, making sure it's done stealthily, then we're going to be able to own the box. And in this case, I'm going to call it ZaRooter. Name. So first of all, we have to find the process of this. Basically, we got to get its process ID so we can actually attach to the process and inject different code into it. So the first call will enumerate the process list, and using OpenProcess with a parameter of process query information, we can basically use this in conjunction with EnumProcessModules and GetModuleBaseNameA to get the process name. Therefore, we can just string all of these to zlclient.exe. There's also a method that I've seen used where you can just get a whole process and PID list and what have you, and it's kind of, if I remember correctly, it's in a linked list sort of structure, but I didn't do it that way. So, oh well. Now, there's one small problem that we're going to have with this. TrueVector is a real pest for the attacker. It basically is a beneficial rootkit. It's going to be that tries to use all of this all these kernel methods to prevent some malicious person from getting their code to run in the way they want to. And it hooks a whole bunch of system calls. You cannot just terminate process the firewall. It's not going to work. You're going to get some access denied sort of error. And even if you attach to the process, it actually hooks NtOpenProcess, so you can't even attach to it. We can't get a handle to zlclient.exe, and that's a problem, because if we handle to it, we can't inject code into it. So, enter the ZaRooter driver. TrueVector, in this version, does not mind if we load a driver. So yeah, it's kind of game over now. We can write to the system service dispatch table, so that means we can execute code on its level and unhook every single function that it hooked. So, and it's actually kind of funny. If you do this and are able to get this code to run, you can literally delete every single program file that ZoneAlarm has, and you're not going to be able to if you don't unhook all of them, but it's actually quite funny to see. So just a little pseudo rootkit driver code here. I'm calling it a pseudo rootkit because it doesn't do anything too malicious. It just unhooks a system call. So what we're going to do is create a memory descriptor list for this system service dispatch table, which is basically held in this dllimport right here that I believe is gotten from ntoskernel.exe. So what we can basically is unhook NtOpenProcess and replace it with the address of the original NtOpenProcess. What TrueVector does is it basically redirects NtOpenProcess into its own safe version. So the original address of this must be known ahead of time, and it differs between service packs. You're probably the method I use for this is to use hard-coded addresses. So if you run this on your box, you're probably going to blue screen yourself if you don't know what you're doing. I was kind of too lazy to insert code in there that, search the whole process memory space for, some token that would identify the original NtOpenProcess. But then we have this macro right here that basically you give it a syscall number and you give it an address, and it sets, that syscall number to point to that address. So now that we have a way to inject code into ZoneAlarm, we have to find some code that's going to shut it down. Now, after doing a whole bunch of reverse engineering of this firewall, basically there is a location at memory 0x0040C261. That number will always be ingrained in my mind because I had to look at it so many times. But basically, the fun part here is you pass it a parameter of 4, and as you can see, there's this little string tvtf force shutdown. Sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it? That's pretty much what it does. In fact, if you inject this code and run it, you will find that ZoneAlarm is not killed. It stays running. But you'll see that there are still some problems that we're going to run into using this method. But if we can inject a call to this with a parameter of 4 being passed to it, we're going to own them. So the problem that number 2 that's going to appear here is that a whole bunch of alerts are going to pop up during this whole process of subverting the firewall. You're going to have a lot of icon changes. You're going to have this text box that magically appears over the various parts of the system that you'll see later, and hovering text boxes, all this fun stuff. We gotta get rid of it. That's the bottom line. We really don't want the user to know that their box actually got owned by us. So the most obvious thing, at least if you have the firewall minimized, is that there's a little icon change right here. Now, if you can see, it says that little red box with a yellow X in it, and it says TrueVector Security Services Shut Down. That's kind of a giveaway that we just own their box. So how does the system do this? How does it change this icon from its normal state to this, yellow X state? There's actually a call called notify icon that will do this. You basically give it a message that you want to send to the icon, and then give it a notify icon data structure or a pointer to it that will give it different information, such as what image to replace it with, stuff like that. So if you can see here, there are 2 parameters that are being passed to this. Now, in assembly, in x86 assembly, basically that means your stack pointer got decremented by, all right, because you have these push that you have when you're calling a function in assembly language, at least in the standard calling convention that's used pretty much throughout Windows, what will happen is you push these 2 parameters onto what's called the stack. Basically, it's a temporary variable space in memory, and then it's called. The function is called. So what we can do is if we just allow these 2 parameters to be pushed onto the stack, and tell the stack to go back up to where its previous state was, guess what? We just disabled that call. So we've taken care of the icon notification that the user will have. Now, the other problem that's very significant in this case is the various screen text that's going to show here. Now, if you can see that, little system error, please reboot, and please restart your computer to ensure security coverage, that's a little bit of a giveaway. This is, these resource strings are in what's called the .rsrc section of the PE. And for all of you who do not know, PE means portable executable. It is the file, the executable format that is used on Windows. Like if you run Linux, you're going to probably be using an ELF binary. If you're, well, running quite a bit older of a version, you might be using a.out binaries. And, just for different operating systems, and what have you, there are different file formats for their executables. But what this means basically is we can overwrite these strings with the originals. So we just have to know what the originals are, and then we can, neutralize those in memory so the user does not see that they got owned. And one important thing is it uses draw text to write these to the screen, which kind of leads to another problem. If you can see here, system error please reboot is in red. Now what's the problem with this? This message right here is usually in green. So that would be another alert that we have to kind of take care of. So, but of course we have to find a solution to this. Now the route that I took for changing the color of this text was a user mode hook on draw text. So what it's basically going to do here is, through all this stuff, background on how these user mode hooks work. We're basically redoing kind of what ZoneAlarm did with their, hooking NtOpenProcess and, pointing us to a different one. And what we're going to do is put this hook on draw text and make it point to our version that does some interesting things to the text if it meets certain criteria. Now, the first thing you have to know whenever you're hooking a function or a system call, whatever you're going after, you really need to preserve the program state. You want the program to pretty much think nothing happened. All your different flags registers should be the same. I've had many instances where I've blown ZoneAlarm up because I did not preserve all the flags registers. And of course, if you don't preserve the registers, period, then you're just gone. So basically, the way I did this was using the Intel x86 opcodes of push A, push FD, pop FD, and pop A. The push A pushes all the registers onto the stack, so then we can restore them later. Push FD pushes the flags register onto the stack so we can restore it. Now, pop basically does the inverse of this. Basically takes the flags register off the stack and puts it back into where it should be in its flags register. And pop A does the likewise with, doing this to the general purpose registers or anything else that you're going to be dealing with. So now what we have to do is find the parameter that contains the string so we can actually see what it's trying to write out onto the screen. So basically, after this whole push add and pop push FD sequence, it's located at ESP plus 2C because of all, it's using the stack to store all these registers, right? So we got to kind of jump over all of those, right, to the real meat of the whole thing. So what we can do is do a dword pointer EBX, basically look at the address that EBX has in it, see what's there at that address, and look for all, just all, because I believe it says all systems are active or something to that extent when it's running normally. So what we can basically do is see if it's there, then we can use this little function called setTextColor to set the text to green. So basically, all you have to do is pass it a handle to the to whatever text you want, and then pass it the color that you want it to be. And so that's very easy to find. I believe you can use something like WinSpy or whatever to look through the different. It'll do different things with the Windows window system. That you can do all sorts of things like see what process owns this window, stuff like that. And basically, after we do this, we do the rest of the stack setup that's necessary for the function to execute, and we win. Now, there's this really big issue that we have right here. So far, we've been able to, write all this code that's going to do this quasi-malicious stuff to the person's system. But transportation is a very big problem in this, because, we have to load a driver somehow, which pretty much we're going to kind of do this the standard way. So it's going to involve writing stuff to the disk and all this other crap. And basically, you're going to have a whole bunch of bytes to deal with that would probably make this a gargantuanly large payload if you wrote it in pure assembly. And it would be very, very ugly and unruly. All stuff. You have bad characters everywhere. probably cause the program to terminate wherever you are injecting this payload into. So what the method that I decided to use to combat this problem is remote DLL injection. Have all of you used Metasploit before? A lot of people know? Yes? Okay. Well, it seems like a lot of you haven't, but what Metasploit is basically a framework for developing and using exploits. So basically, you have these payload libraries, and you have different exploits that you can use, and different encoders, stuff like that, so that it can pretty much automate the whole process of exploit development. One of its payloads is that it can remotely load a DLL onto another system. Now, if any of you have ever seen someone using Metasploit and just getting like a remote C connection or remote, basically remote desktop connection to the other person's system, that's all done through DLL injection. They have how it's layered is, modeled is basically a stage model. What the idea is you say you have a very limited amount of space to insert this code, right? And what you want it to do is you're able to write like a very small chunk of code that will read in a whole bunch of code. So you can effectively, have this stage, load this stage, and so on. So what we'll do is we'll basically, do whatever it needs to do to get a connection to the attacker, read this other stage in, and then execute that. So what it does is first, after it's been injected, it will load this code that will basically read in a DLL over the network and load it. And it does this by hooking various types of load library and some other stuff, basically so it does not have to load this DLL from the disk. You're not touching the disk in the entire time that you're doing this. And that's very helpful because this will, throw off all sorts of antiviruses and other HIP systems that could possibly get in the way of us being able to execute this code. Now, after we get the DLL injected, we're going to, sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. We're going to include the driver. Remember, we have to load this driver to get our stuff to work. We're going to include that as a resource in the DLL. You can basically embed files and stuff like that, and text it, as in the case of ZoneAlarm here. So what you can do is use the find resource, load resource, lock resource, and write file functions to write to the disk. And basically what this will do is it will load this resource and then write it out to a file so that we can load this driver via a standard method via the SCM, the System Control Manager. So this is not the most stealthy method of loading a possibly malicious driver. Okay, this is mainly proof of concept that in fact you can do this. So that's kind of what I did here. I kind of took a little bit of an easy way out on this. Now, we have to coerce execution of this code. So what we can do is, since we've already loaded this driver and all this other stuff that's going to be able to let us, monkey with the process memory, we can use WriteProcessMemory to write the code to the various addresses that we need it. And this code will actually, like the code that I showed you where, pass it a parameter of 4, it shuts the, it basically tells TrueVector to go screw itself and not run. Well, basically not function for our purposes. That's basically what I did is I just, looked through a assembly dump of the program and then found a whole bunch of slack space where I could inject all of this code. And pretty much we'll just WriteProcessMemory that there. So then to execute this, we can use a call called CreateRemote Thread to execute the code. That basically you pass it an address and I guess parameters you want to pass it, and it will create another thread in the other system that's running your code. We have to do this after we have changed all the strings and injected like the hook on draw text, all of this stuff like that. Because what's going to happen if you don't is you'll basically end up hitting memory that's you don't want it to hit. Like it could either be well, no, it's not going to hit on map memory because I put this in the slack space, but you'll basically hit stuff that you don't want it to execute, and your program will crash and that's not so stealthy because, it's going to, basically, if you do manage to do this, and it will, the firewall will be dead, but TrueVector will still be running. And what it will basically do is not allow any incoming or outgoing TCP connections to the box. So basically, you kind of screw the user over and yourself if you if you weren't prompt in doing this. So, have another demo. Okay. Let's see okay, wait a minute here. Okay, so the first thing I did to prove that ZoneAlarm was working was pinged google.com simply. Now what I'm going to do is, there needs to be a little bit of background on something you're going to see before I show it. There will be an alert popped up when I run this program, but the reason why is okay, loading those DLLs remotely with Metasploit, they have a little test program called metservtest. And basically all it does is for your DLL, it will open a socket and then pass that socket descriptor to your DLL and call this one function inside of it called init. And the socket thing here is kind of what the whole making it look like it's going to come up when you run this, but it won't, I promise. Because the reason why it's doing that is usually the attacker wants some sort of a socket handle so they can communicate back to the attacker and whatnot. But our goal here is we are not going to be able to have any further interaction and basically make our own connection. And one thing I really need to mention about this is, again, this is mainly useful for client-side exploits such as a web browser, a word processor, anything like that, that you normally do not want to be connected to the internet. Like, you can't do some find sock or find tag method, where you actually have a socket to the attacker already, and you're just going to reuse that to shovel, communication with the attacker and the own box over. So basically, the bottom line here is that I was too lazy to write my own program to load the DLL and run it, and if you know how many lines of code that takes, that shows I'm really lazy. So, on with the show here. So I'm going to cd into I'm running metservtest here, and then basically pointing it to the DLL that we want to load. And so, of course, that alert that I just explained pops up there. So what I'm going to do is, because it wants a socket handle, it wants a valid socket handle, I'm just going to point my to the port that it's listening on and go to it. So then it's satisfied. Okay, yeah, so I did that, and basically for our notification, it'll pop up, you got owned twice, and just a little message box there. So now, did this actually work? So what we're going to do is ping google.com right there, and as you can see, nothing happens. So we win. Now, some other firewalls. I did a very detailed analysis of these first two firewalls. Now, how about we compare that to some other firewalls that are currently on the market and see, basically how they compare to either of these. So basically what I did was just some general tests. I didn't actually write code, manually and reverse the program, manually go through, find out where the exit function is, force a call to that, all that stuff, and write a payload for it. But just some general things that would kind of tell you the of the firewall in question. So the first one was code injection into another process. Like, the method I used for testing this is I generated a payload with Metasploit, like, say a bind shell or a remote or a connect back shell, whatever you'd want to do, and then use some sed magic to be able to extract the correct opcodes from it, and then used OllyDBG to manually binary paste this payload into something like IC. So it's a bit of a ghetto method, but, well, sort of, but no. Oh well. So, and the next thing that we really want to look at is the ability to debug the main firewall process. As you can see, if you can do that, you own, the system. It's gone. And not to mention, we need to check whether syscalls were hooked in an obvious manner. And mainly I did this if the first two failed. You can't inject code just into a random other process you don't have the ability to debug the main firewall process, but let's try to use the method that we use to own ZoneAlarm, and then just load a kernel driver to do all this unhooking work for us, and see if it works. So, yeah, okay. Forget that slide. I'll come back to it later. The first firewall I evaluated in the lesser evaluation category was Kerio. At the time of writing, the main process was able to be debugged. But it does detect code injection into a trusted process, but that's kind of like, I don't know, you lock your doors but have all your windows open, so, it's kind of like, yeah, we can still own it then. And it also did not seem to be able to detect a driver load, which is a big problem because, that doesn't combat things like rootkits or anything like that. And another firewall was Komodo that I evaluated. The main process cannot be debugged, and it does have non-obvious hooking methods, which is a big plus for that. And it also did detect code injection into a trusted process. But the killer here is it didn't seem to be able to detect a driver load, so we can still own it. Now, the absolute latest ZoneAlarm. Now, I have to give the Zone Labs people props for this because they've drastically improved their product, and the current method that I'm using will not on it. So, basically, the evaluation of this goes, it does detect code injection into a trusted process, and you cannot debug the main firewall process. This was, of course, true for the first ZoneAlarm version that I evaluated. And it also detects driver loads. So out of the other two that I evaluated, or I guess that would be, 5 in total, it's the only one that detected driver loads. But it does seem to have the same hooking mechanism as before. So for disabling this one is if you are able to get remote ring 0 on the system or local ring 0, say there's like you send a malicious device IOCTL to a vulnerable driver, right? You're going to basically have either kernel stack overflow or something like this. And the thing is, it seems that exploitation in this day and age is really moving towards that because most people are focusing on user mode. Most of the that goes into hardening the system is all about, we're going to try to prevent stack execution in user mode, all this other stuff, heap protection, things that don't really matter so much inside of the kernel. So basically, if you're able to get this ring 0 code executed, you can definitely disable this hooking mechanism. So you're going to be able to, own it that way. But come to think of it, if you're really able to get ring 0 execution on that system, then you can do things like shovel in the rootkit, the full rootkit remotely. So, that would be something interesting to try out. And I believe Alexander Tereshkin had done this on a version of, his method was not actually using a kernel mode exploit, but he wrote a pretty detailed kernel mode rootkit to disable this version that it basically worked through disabling with the indis.sys driver, so you have it basically monkeyed around with a lot of the really low-level networking stuff inside of Windows and was able to, bypass whatever alerts that would come up that way. So it kind of wouldn't really know what was going on. So basically, the conclusion here. Actually, wait, let me go back here because I remember I forgot this slide. What more needs to be done for I had written here? It really needs to be portable. Like I said, if you run this on your SP2, your non-SP2, or even your SP2 at another hotfix or something than what I did, you're going to get a blue screen of death, and that won't be fun. So it really needs to support different patch levels, and it needs to do a lot more dynamic resolving of the functions in question. And it would also be nice if it could resolve the KeServiceDescriptorTable. I think that was the right DLL export that was I had mentioned previously. So basically, be able to find the address of this system service dispatch table in memory more dynamically. So this would bypass a lot of the different rootkit detection mechanisms that do actually look for, oh, is someone going to try to hook the syscall table this way? Well, we obviously, if they're going to try to import, do a DLL import on KeServiceDescriptorTable, then they're probably going to be doing something nasty. But, this is not always the case because, then again, ZoneAlarm does this as well, and it's, trying to benefit you. So, but basically, that's another feature that would be very, very helpful for this code. And it also needs to be a lot more intelligent in the generation of the hook on draw text. Because, again, I use static with this. You know what? Guess what happens if your, say your draw text is actually at another address than it should be. You're going to get the hook written in the wrong location, and it's going to, cause all sorts of mayhem to happen with your system. And, you basically since jumps are relative, basically there's an offset. It just doesn't say jump and then just this address right here because, well, basically that would take too many bytes. And one important thing that I should probably mention about this is that this code does only work on, like I said, this code does only work on SP2, but the really, really, really nice thing about Service Pack 2 is the fact that, those hotfixes you apply every now and then? How it actually patches whatever it's going to patch is the fact it is a mechanism built in by Microsoft. What it has is the first 5 bytes function are basically, you always are going to know them inside kernel32.dll, and pretty much all of the other Microsoft system DLLs that are included with your system. So we have this 5 bytes, right? Now what's special about that? Well, let's think here. How many bytes does it take to jump to another, basically, D word in memory? 5. So you're always going to have the amount of bytes being able to be written, and basically it makes this hook a lot easier because if you did not have this, you kind of have to write your own disassembler and all this other stuff and knock out the other instructions that you're going to be overwriting in the process, and then write the equivalent opcodes to your hook, and that just is a pain in the butt. So that's why I didn't do that. Okay, so main thing here, in conclusion, there are a couple of things that we can really all learn about this. Firewalls are pretty much just applications. They're not the end-all of security. You still need to write secure code that is going to be robust in many different environments for you to, not really get rooted. So, and subverting them is only going to increase in importance. You have this rise in cross-site scripting attacks. You have the rise in file format vulnerabilities. They kind of go hand in hand. It's just more and more often you're not going to have a direct connection to the person that you rooted. So we basically have to break out. So that's what this code does. Now, some special thanks here to HD Moore, who had helped me with some of the more lesser-known things about the Metasploit framework. If any of you ever used it, or maybe there are some developers of it in here. I don't see Vlad or Escape anywhere, but oh well. The documentation leaves a lot to be desired. I'll just put it that way. So he was able to help with that. And Poncho, right in the back over there with the red bandana on, he helps me with the upkeep of the Noxus Files website and is a very intelligent individual indeed. And Optics for providing me some various pointers about how to go about this process. Now, if you want the code to all this and you're stupid enough to actually run it, you can go to noxusfiles.com and it's all there. And don't click on the research section because I've been kind of, I just didn't add any content there. But the thing is, it's all on the front page, bottom line. So just pay attention to that. And if anyone gets an idea to do cross-site scripting or SQL injections to the site, I'm just going to put it this way: you will be very, very, very sorry. Tub girl. Okay. So yeah, that basically covers it. If you all have any questions, feel free to ask them. Anyone? Yes. Well, basically, there isn't a whole lot of other stuff that they're going to miss. I actually played around with it to see what was, going to happen, but, pretty much TrueVector isn't really on. They're going to have to restart basically to get it up again. So if you really, really, really want to have a secure for, you know, like a rootkit for, you know, keeping access to the system, you're going to have some mechanism to continually keep this disabled or just poke a hole through it. So anyone else? No one? What was that? No, wasn't directed at me. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then have a good time at the remainder of ToorCon, and thanks for coming.